Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Saturday's property show. And today we are going to be discussing difficult tenants, taboo subject. But are they all really bad? The answer is no. But what can you do? And we're going to cover as much as we can today with the different scenarios around potentially difficult tenants and how to manage that process in the best way, I think, is probably the best approach that we could advise today. But I mean, most tenancies do run their course without any major hitches, Kerin, and you could stand testament to that. Ending up with difficult tenants is a real concern for landlords and agents alike, I suppose. And we're often asked, how do you spot or how do you avoid potential troublesome candidates? So, I mean, through the years and years of experience and this rigorous referencing process that needs to be in place, all help us eliminate most of the risk. But you can never really know how someone will react to a problem or a potential dispute until it actually comes along and you're dealing with it in real time. And often the difficult label as such is pinned on tenants who behave or communicate in ways that they feel or that the ways that feels kind of jarring to you as the landlord or potentially the agent, and make it quite tricky to handle. And then that could really spiral into a kind of yucky mix of frustration, exhaustion, and then ultimately resentment. And that's just not a situation that you do want to be in. But fortunately, there are ways to minimise the chance of difficulties in the first place from the very outset, and to diffuse the drama before it ever even occurs. So with that in mind, we are going to dig a little deeper today. We're going to cover what does difficult look like, creating that clarity with the surrounding the contract, the private residential tenancy here in Scotland, and what's expected of a tenant. Also handing over for harmony as one of the subjects, and how to do that handover properly, cooling down conflicts, and when difficult turns to bad, and that's not a situation you want to be in, and it can be avoided. So hopefully we can cover that today, and you already see a lot more progress. And difficult tenants, it's kind of automatically assumed as terrible. Then our guide can help you handle that situation with greater confidence and a lot more control. So Kerin, let's kick off, and you can run us through what does difficult look like. I mean, we say difficult tenants, we're not tarring everyone with the same brush. It's more about, I think personally, about people. We could say tenants and categorize these, but then it's just about people in general. I mean, some people can be difficult.
Yeah, and ultimately we have a lot of great people in our properties, and we have so many lovely tenants, and there's people that, we've obviously built up really good relationships with over time as well. But you do get some, as you say, not even tenants, just people that are harder work than others. Not everybody has the same stance on how to discuss things with people, and it can make things really difficult sometimes for both landlords, agents, contractors as well can get the brunt of it sometimes. So there's various factors that come in here, but the term difficult tenant covers a broad spectrum of behaviours. So often the root cause isn't down to the malicious intent, but simple differences in communication or understanding. So obviously we know the simplest of misunderstandings can make a situation a lot worse than maybe it needs to be. But contacting you, for example, these things can be such as contacting you constantly for minor issues that fall under the tenant's own responsibility, or being completely unresponsive and making maintenance and repairs a logistical challenge. So we've seen this, obviously, tenants that get in contact to maybe report an issue, we try and get it fixed, and then trying to get access for a contractor is very tricky. So we see this, unfortunately, sometimes.
That's a really interesting one. And I think when it comes to repairs and maintenance, then the responsibility of the tenant to a certain degree, and then where the landlord or the agent's responsibility is to step in and take care of things. And that's all about making that very clear at the beginning of who's responsible for what and what is expected of the tenant, and setting that out quite clearly at the beginning. And then there's no confusion about whose responsibility it is. And that could be a real catalyst for, as I say, obviously it kind of then goes into like that frustration and exhaustion, and then basically you end up total resentment between landlord and tenant and things, and that's not a situation that you want to be in.
Exactly, and even slight things such as misinterpreting the tenancy agreement can lead to some issues that you have. So things such as noise level, nuisance, behaviour, access for inspections, or conflicts with other housemates or neighbours. So, and again, it's whenever we're doing viewings, it's you want somebody that's going to try and fit in within that neighbourhood as well. Because I mean, if you've got the right neighbours, make your property. So obviously we want to be putting tenants in there that are going to fit in nicely. They're not going to cause havoc with the neighbours, but ultimately nobody has a crystal ball. So going through this referencing process that we do hopefully eliminates as much risk as we can there.
Yeah, the misinterpretation of things it's easily done, and it's being able to, make sure everybody knows where they stand, and then if there's not, then managing people's expectation in a different situation about what their expectation is and what the real expectation or the real, their responsibility is.
That's the thing, and a lot of times tenants maybe don't understand what their responsibilities are for it. So simple things that can be set out in the tenancy agreement can clarify that. But it is like, for example, bleeding radiators or topping up boiler pressures. Like these are all things that tenants have got responsibility to do. They're simple things. If you don't know how to do them, you can easily find videos on how to on YouTube. But even sometimes conversations like that can make it a little bit uncomfortable for a landlord, especially if they're dealing with it directly, to have that conversation. Or even things like if a smoke alarm battery needs changed, these are all simple things that tenants can do, but sometimes they don't realise they have that responsibility to action that on their own.
Yeah.
Another one that we understand is allowing personal issues and emotions to influence their interactions. So making your tenant, this can make your tenant appear quite demanding or difficult when they might just be having a tough time. And it comes back to, I think, obviously we don't know what goes on behind closed doors. Somebody can be having a good day, somebody can be having a bad day, and sometimes that's portrayed unnecessarily. And obviously maybe if they're coming on the phone to report an issue, it can be easier for them to take it out in that situation. Well, ultimately it's nothing naturally to do with that.
Yeah, and that's where the listening skill comes in. Because if somebody does come on the phone and it gets a bit obviously heated and things, rather than escalate that and add fuel to the fire, just give them a chance to think, let it all out, listen to what they've got to say, and then step in. If you try and then challenge somebody like that and then and try and butt in, and that's not the way to handle a situation like that. Listening is the key.
Like people say, a problem shared is a problem halved. So sometimes if they've just had that opportunity to be able to have that rant and get it off their chest, like you say, it can, and then you can step in with that, hopefully still level head to resolve it. And obviously understand where they're coming from. We get frustrated, especially when we're dealing with things that are maybe not on our day-to-day basis. So it can make things harder to deal with as a tenant when you are experiencing these things and you maybe don't know the right course for it. It can maybe be taken out on a landlord or agent. However, if you have a level head on the other side, at least you're then working towards resolving the issue as opposed to escalating it and irritating the situation even further.
Yeah, definitely.
Whilst frustrating, most of these situations are usually resolved by simple tips in this blog, and you can even find more information on other articles such as tenant troubles or needy tenants.
Yes, these are ones we've done before, shows and blogs that we've got attached to that. The link to them is in the blog that's attached to this show, and you could click through on them. The needy tenants and the tenant troubles one. They are all really good guides for helping navigate through difficult situations. So that's really good. Now we're going to move on to creating contract clarity. Now, if you're a landlord in Scotland, you will know we have the private residential tenancy up here in Scotland, and it is set out by the Scottish Government. Now, there is mandatory clauses in there, but we can add to it, and you can amend it slightly and things as well. If you're obviously south of the border and you're in England and Wales and things, one of the best ways to avoid tenant difficulties is to design them out. It's to design them out from the beginning, basically, these issues, and that is with a watertight tenancy agreement, and it's really essential to do that. The private residential tenancy in Scotland is quite good because a lot of the mandatory clauses in there are quite good, but you can add in as well. But sometimes that isn't just enough. And the reality is that most of us don't read every single term and condition of every agreement that we sign. And the same goes for tenants as well. They don't go through it all and read it quite meticulously. So before the tenancy starts, it's probably quite a good, it definitely is a good advice to make sure your tenant reads through the tenancy agreement, has an opportunity to do that, advise them that that's the best thing they need to do, so that they are actually aware of the responsibilities, because it's all laid out there in the agreement. It's definitely in the PRT in Scotland. If you're out with Scotland, make sure you have all that information in there. What the responsibility is of the tenant for maintenance when it comes to them to take care of something, or when then it's the agent or the landlord to step in. Highlight the key clauses of the agreement where problems or possibly misunderstandings typically occur. And as we say, one of the major ones is around maintenance and repairs and things as well. Draw the tenant's attention to their responsibilities around, appliance care, if there's appliances there. Things like defrosting the fridge freezer. People don't, that's the tenant's responsibility. Cleaning the oven, that's the tenant's responsibility. Well, refilling the dishwasher's salt, if you've got a dishwasher, if you've got appliances in there. Because you would be very surprised that you would maybe get a phone call to say, the dishwasher's not working, it needs the salt topped up. Okay, that's a tenant responsibility. But you would be very surprised that some people, I know I don't like to refer it to as tenants, because it could be quite, people in general don't actually have a lot of common sense.
Common sense, not that common.
And we're not targeting tenants in particular here, to be honest. I think it's just certain people have different views and opinions and take on things, and it's just trying to manage that and make them to put it to a tenant or a person where it's so easy and simple for them to understand. It just makes life a lot easier. Things like the washing machine as well, the washing machine seal, everybody gets that in their home. If you're providing an appliance or a washing machine without that in the beginning, if that builds up during the tenancy, it's the tenant's responsibility to clean that and have it returned without that mold or whatever around the seal. That's one that I've come across in the past as well. Also, really emphasize any clauses for the mid-tenancy inspections, when they are, what the responsibility is for the tenant for allowing access, quiet times, if it's after 10 o'clock, especially if you're in blocks of flats and things like that as well. Security measures like locks and alarms, and what they can or can't pour down drains and flush down toilets. We've had a few of that over the years, and kids' toys and just overloading toilets and things as well, with just too much toilet roll and a lots of like things that I won't go through on this, but it does happen, and it's the tenants.
Things that shouldn't be down there.
Not be down the toilet, just to take better care, and the responsibility of the tenant to do that, and getting all that clear, and really the clarity of that from the outset, it could go a remarkably long way to preventing these potential difficulties down the line. And in short, never assume that a tenant has read and understood everything that's in the tenancy agreement, or we have accompanying. We also have accompanying like easy read notes here in Scotland that go with the private residential tenancy. That is a big document, and send this ahead of time to your tenant and say, look, take the time to read through all this, and if you've got any questions, come back before we even start the tenancy. And that will go a long way to making things running a lot smoother throughout the tenancy, definitely.
And we also provide our tenants some general easy read notes for the start of their tenancy, which does set out extra things like what their responsibilities are, if they're in an emergency situation, what actually constitutes as an emergency, for such as out of hours calls. Again, different people have different expectations when it comes to things like that. So setting these things all out, but although it's emailed to them and given to them in a paper copy, this is still something that I will go through with them at the move-in, so they understand these things, because ultimately, and half the time it does just go right over the head when they're looking forward to getting moved in. They're most like, where's my furniture going to go, rather than, right, I need to set up my council tax. But these are still things that we go through with them. So there is reducing the margin for error there, or even teething issues as well when somebody does move in. That's obviously something we'd like to eliminate. So doing everything we can in the first place makes it a bit of a smoother start.
You make a good point about teething issues, and I mean, it would be ideal to eliminate them, but you never will completely. But I think you can really minimise them by doing things, and that is all about the handover. And this is what we're going to move on to, and it's the handing over for harmony. And I'm going to let you cover this, Kerin, because you take obviously a big part in
the handovers.
The handover, yeah. I mean, it's something that's so important because it does set things and sets the tone for the rest of the tenancy, that handover point. So yeah, run us through some points on that.
So obviously it's an exciting day for tenants. They're getting the keys to their new house, but ultimately there is a legal aspect that goes with it as well. And ultimately we do want a nice, smooth running tenancy, not only for our own benefit, but for the tenants and for the landlord. If everybody's happy, it's perfect for us. But ultimately, even if you've had a property, for example, that's had a tenant in it for a long time, you could have issues that maybe haven't been an issue for that tenant. However, if you've got a new tenancy in it, they're seeing things very differently. But beyond setting up the tenancy on the correct legal footing, you can also make sure you hand it over the property in a most future-proof, friendly and responsible, getting all tongue-tied, there's too many R's in it. Basically making sure the property is handed over in a way that is going to be friendly for your tenants. They then have their responsibilities and a respectful relationship with both the tenant and landlord as well.
All the R's that are tripping you up this morning.
I know, there's too many.
But yeah, you're absolutely right, because it builds that foundation, and you do develop that kind of, do you know, it's like that, like you say, a respectful, like a relationship and things with a tenant, and once you've got that in place, it makes it you've got a really like smoother journey ahead.
It does, and it means that if you are having those more uncomfortable situations, such as something's not working in the property, or maybe the tenant's not paid their rent, it does make it a lot easier to go and speak to them about it. I mean, you get sometimes where it's just their standing orders or maybe not gone through quite right, or there's been an issue with their banking, and sometimes just that, if they've not had any previous issues, maybe just that nice friendly phone call, just asking what's for a wee update on it, can be all it takes to sort things out. So things don't always have to be as severe as they might.
You know, we had that the other day actually.
Yesterday.
Yesterday, and we were doing a meeting, and you were like, "Oh, she's missed her rent. That's not like her." And you just picked up the phone and were like, "Do you know, I've noticed?" And she's like, "Oh, I didn't even realize it." And then she phoned back like about 10 minutes later, and like, "That's it, sorted." So yeah, that's a prime example of that.
Well, there was two of them yesterday that was exactly the same. One of them got on the phone, spoke to her, absolutely fine. We got it resolved literally pretty much immediately, and she, as you say, she hadn't even noticed. And the other one, I couldn't get them on the phone, but just a nice wee text, just noticed this hasn't come through this month. Do you know, like, could you give me a wee update on it? And they're like, "Oh, really sorry, that's it sorted." So again, just that quick, just that nice communication. And I, like we say as well, especially when it's tenants that it's not expected for them to be in that situation. It's different. Obviously, if it's maybe a tenant that's been a bit more problematic and a bit more difficult when it comes to paying rent, but ones where it's unusual for them to be behind or have to have not paid it, just a wee simple friendly phone call can be what resolves that. And hopefully it's just to be a misunderstanding there for it as well. Yeah. But coming back to that more maintenance aspect of it, things such as supplying the instruction manuals for your appliances. If you've lost the originals, then you can generally find a PDF download to be able to give them, or you can go on to things like Google, YouTube as well, can be really helpful for being able to supply tenants with manuals for it. I would say one of the main ones that it's good to have a manual for is the heating system, or the heating control at least for it.
Always, yeah.
Yeah. So even when we've got ones, even some of your more modern ones, like I love when I go to a move-in and it's got one of the wee time clocks that you just push the pins in and out of. So easy to explain to a tenant. Anybody can get their head around that. But you do get some controllers that are quite difficult. So having a manual there for it can make it so much easier. And then again, if that's something that's controlling both the heating and the hot water, if you've got a new tenant in and they're not able to figure it out to get their hot water on, that's them not getting a shower. That is going to be a bad start to the day.
That's an immediate teething problem that she'll be on the phone to try and resolve.
Exactly.
Which you could have nipped in the bud at the point of moving. That handover, yeah. And
I always do my best to explain to a tenant how to control the boiler, and obviously how to top up the pressure if they need to, if it's a combi boiler. But there are some manuals that ultimately you do ideally need a guide for. So it's good to have them in the property. And other appliances as well, such as cookers, washing machines. Most of them are fairly explanatory, but there are ones that, again, as we say, not everybody has common sense. So sometimes you do have to make it a lot simpler for them, just to eliminate any teething issues, because you don't know what kind of tenant that you will have in until they're in and starting using things.
Yeah.
Ensuring your property is thoroughly cleaned is another one that we highly recommend if you want a nice smooth tenancy, and it's done to a professional level as well. Again, cleanliness is something that everybody has different variations on. What's clean to you might not be clean to somebody else. So if you have it to that professional level, that obviously eliminates that aspect there. But also good things to include are your windows, the floor coverings, paintwork scuffs, kitchen appliances, and mold on tiles or sealants. Mold is a really big one. Even when we do not entertain viewings if there's mold in the property, because it doesn't give people a good example of it, and it's something. Yeah, exactly. And if it's something that's not cleaned away, then it will the climate that we're in here, we are really prone to it. So it's one of those things that I feel like an expert on it, just the amount of times that we've had properties that have got mold situations going on in them. But if you know how to deal with it, and again, explaining to your tenants, but giving them that clean slate in the first place is really important. So then they don't have issues when they're first moving into the property. And it's just not a very nice first experience of it either as well, if you've got mold in the bathroom, for example.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Servicing your appliances regularly and completing any outstanding repairs by the move-in date. So another one, sometimes there isn't always going to be time to get final little bits sorted. And if it's something that's maybe not detrimental to the tenancy, you might have agreed prior with your tenant by saying, look, this will get fixed while you're in place. But having as much done for the start of the tenancy, again, you're going to eliminate teething issues and start your tenancy on a better footing there.
There is sometimes where timescales, and you could manage a timeline as meticulously as you can, but sometimes the odd one won't go to plan. And if someone is really keen to get moved in, or you've set that timeline based on maybe possibly they're moving to the area or something, they need to move in, and it's not going to stop them moving in. But as long as you set out a clear agreed agenda, like, look, this, you can move in today. In 2 days' time, the contractor's going to come in and sort this out, and just follow up and make sure that all happens as promised, then it's fine. As long as it's not something like a safety certificate sign off or whatever, because they do really need to be done. But if it's a small maintenance issue, it can be done slightly after the tenancy, but make sure your tenant knows you've got it all in hand.
Yeah, and like you say there, your safety aspect, like all your safety certificates, that's a legal compliance and has to be done before you can move anybody in. So if you do have any experiences, and it's good to get them done a wee bit beforehand. Granted, thankfully, it has happened a very small handful of times, but you go to get, for example, a gas safety certificate done, and there's a problem with the boiler. So it's better to have it done a little bit in advance. So obviously, when the move-in does come around, you know that everything's all set up for you, and you're not having to scramble to get a plumber out to get the boiler sorted if you do already have a move-in date arranged for it as well. So it can be quite stressful for both.
I think there's maybe a wee bit of misconception where some landlords and things think that, okay, let's get the gas cert done like the day before or whatever, or as close to the start. I mean, it's good to do that because you'll get the longest run, like, of the annual check out of it. But I think it's probably better to maybe do it at least the week prior, so that if anything comes up in the gas safety check and the boiler's functionality, it can be resolved in plenty of time before the move in.
Yeah, that kind of 2-week point before somebody's due to move in is a good point for making sure the last of your safety certificates are getting finalised. So like you say, you're getting the longest run out of them, but they're also gives you time if there is anything that crops up, there's time to get it fixed.
Don't leave things to the day before.
No.
The only thing you should get done the day before is the inventory.
Yes, exactly. Everything else should be done prior to that. But handing over your property all spick and span will show your tenant how you do things, help them meet their responsibilities, and deliver a clean message over how you expect the property to be treated.
Yeah, definitely. And it's just that clear communication and things. And that's what I'm going to talk about just now as we talk about and move on to cooling down conflicts. And it really is basically like a job of like mediation and things when you get to that point. And if the years of managing rental properties and things has taught me anything, it's that adapting that communication to adapting your communication to individual landlords and the individual tenants makes your work far more effective, because like we've already expressed, that a lot of people have different views, different opinions, they look at situations in a different way. So it's managing people's expectations and mediating from the middle, especially if you've already got a tenant in place and you're trying to, obviously, your client's the landlord, you've got your duty of care to the tenant, and they both have very different views. You are the person in the middle, and it's about adapting yourself to fit their expectations, but at the same time advising them of the correct way to do things. So basically, I think it's like winning them round to your way, not your way of thinking, but maybe the correct way of thinking when it comes to legislation and things, and the correct way that things are done, because at the end of the day, you're the qualified person in the middle that's advising everybody the right things to do. I mean, no tenant is at their best when possibly roofs are leaking. I mean, the on the other side of the storms and everything we had in Scotland from last winter, I mean, we're still doing the clear up, fences and roofs and things, and or if maybe there's not hot water in the property, and they can't have a shower and things, you're going to have a disgruntled tenant at that point. But just like dealing with possibly colleagues at work, you can influence how things pan out with your own actions and your own words and how your approach is. And I've seen it happen in the past, and landlords and things, you go in all guns blazing, it's going to just absolutely exacerbate things. It's not the way to handle it at all. If something falls under a tenant's responsibility, explain that clearly and calmly at that point to them in the direction of the instruction manuals that you've spoke about, Kerin. Guide them to there, troubleshoot with them, and possibly point them in direction at other helpful sources of information of how to handle the situation that they are responsible for. I mean, ultimately, if it's their responsibility and they're not too sure and they're unsure of what to do, we always say, look, this is what you need to do, or this is where you need to go and find the right information, or pick up whatever they need to do to rectify the situation, whether it's a local store or whatever. But again, if you've set that out at the beginning about their responsibility for that, you wouldn't have that conversation mid-tenancy. But obviously, this is where we're at the point of conflicts and how to resolve that and cool things down. For other issues, respond quickly is always the good thing. Don't leave things, because if someone's already worked up and trying to get a hold of you, the landlord, you, the agent, if you're taking a long time to go back to them, that just then gives them time to stew, basically. And the quicker you go back to them and respond and have that conversation, then the quicker it'll be resolved. Always ask them for that complete picture of exactly what's happened. I've had this over the years, and you will too, Kerin. You get an out of hours call, and they think it's the biggest issue ever, and you maybe get a voicemail or something, and it's a wee bit, gargled, and you can't really make out. So, and they're obviously all worked up. And once you get on the phone and say, right, okay, go on, and could you go through this step by step? What's the problem? And it really isn't that a big issue, and it's so easily resolved to you because you know the answer and the solution, but they don't. So yeah, make sure they really explain it to you what's happening, and the problem won't disappear by obviously not going back to them, ignoring it, but leaving it that long time and not getting back to them and dealing with it accordingly could actually cost you as the landlord a lot more by just kind of putting it off, and it might not even be that a big issue in the first instance if you take that time to listen to them and let them explain and then deal with it. Then putting it off and leaving it, it could, depending on what it is, if it's a leak, it could get a lot worse the longer you leave it. So quick response times, clear communication, ask them to break it down for you, and really just go through that process as quickly as you can with them.
I think, and sometimes as well, if you do get a tenant that has maybe got you to a level that you are quite exacerbated with them, sometimes if it's good to maybe respond to them and say, look, I've got this, I'm going to look into it and I'll get back to you, and maybe take that little step back and take a breather for it if it's not an emergency. Because sometimes if you do go back in haste when you're maybe feeling a bit riled up about the situation, again, you're just can add fuel to the fire there. We've seen it sometimes, it's like something comes through and it's like, oh my goodness. But if you just take that step back and take a minute to kind of breathe through it, and it's like, right, okay, this is how we're going to deal with it clearly and calmly moving forward. So, but again, as long as it's not an emergency.
People could be very irate when they're in that situation, and like, so you just maybe need to listen to them, let them process that, get the information, give yourself a little time to step back and think, right, what's the best way to deal with this, and then go back and deal with it. Trying to do it all at once when someone's on the other end of the phone or email or possibly in your office, or and really irate, you're trying to then muddle through and think, right, what's the best way to do this and whatever. Take a step back, everybody take a bit of a breather and just think, right, what's the best way to resolve this? It's the best solution. It always is. And people go in, head first, and it doesn't work.
And like we're about to touch on as well, the language that you use in these situations is really important.
Yeah, things like, definitely the language, like, saying to that person, like, I understand the situation is frustrating. So you're acknowledging like their frustration and how they feel, and reassuring them that, I am taking this seriously, so that they know that you're not just muddling through and not really thinking about what you're doing, or thanking them for explaining it to you clearly. If they take the time to then explain to you clearly, step by step, what the problem is and what situation they're in, thank them for doing that, and then explain to them, like, right, okay, let's see what can be done, and those kind of things, and that terminology and language can work wonders for just really calming a situation right down, because then they think, right, okay, this person's taking me seriously, they're listening to me, they're ready to find a resolution and help me, basically. And language is so important. And even when you think maybe, oh, I shouldn't have to do this, this is not my, a fast response and keeping in touch, and this whole process and that progress is really the magic formula for taking the heat out of a situation, and it keeps everybody really cool. And that's ultimately, like I say, cooling down the conflicts.
Yeah, and communication, like we say, is key for that as well. Just that. Yeah, just obviously even keeping up to date, like, right, the contractor's been arranged, this is when they're coming out. Just that simple phone call can make or break the situation as well with it. So keeping your tenants up to date, keeping your landlords up to date, and the contractors as well, so they know what's going on if they're going to have to be going out as well. And having reliable contractors that you know that you can call on if you're in that situation, but that are also going to do a good job as well, because there's no point in you getting somebody out that's maybe on the cheaper side that thinks they can fix it, and then ultimately you just end up in a worse situation, because now you're going to have to get somebody else in to fix it properly, and you've got two bills potentially, and probably an even more aggravated tenant.
Yeah, and and it's so true what we were saying earlier. Like, we talk about these things, like how you communicate and the language you use and how you interact with a person and things. And this is totally relatable in any avenue of your life when you're interacting with people. We're only talking about tenants because this is a forum to advise landlords and tenants alike how to best interact. But in any walk of life, when you're dealing with people and people in the public and things, you'll encounter this. People all think differently, act differently, and respond differently. And as long as you respond and approach people with the right language and the right attitude, it goes a long way.
Most definitely.
However, when difficult does turn to bad, Kerin, run us through it then, because it does happen.
Unfortunately, it does. And as much as you can try and prevent it from happening, ultimately, at some point, there's a good chance that it will, especially the probability for the amount of properties that we've got. You are going to get the odd bad one, unfortunately. But as we say at the start of the blog, most of the tenancies do stay clear from major drama. But what happens if your tenant breaches the terms of their contract? So this can be quite challenging to deal with, but it can't be ignored. So whether it's rent arrears, antisocial behaviour, damage, you need to act quickly, keep professional, and stay focused on a solution. So avoiding getting personal, that will only escalate the situation. And in these situations, it can be quite hard to do that, but sometimes, as we say, you just maybe need to take a wee breather, because it can be quite frustrating. But some of the things you can do is write to your tenants. For example, text or email at the first stage is fine, citing the clause in the agreement that they've breached, what they should do to put things right, and by when, so giving them that time and scale as well. Be firm, but be fair and polite.
Yeah, definitely.
So if you're going to go in all hot-headed in the first place, it's, as we say, it's probably just going to make the situation worse. Whereas if you try and keep a calm approach to it, as frustrating as the situation may be that you could be in, again, as we say, it just escalates it there.
You make a good point though, because you can be really firm, but still be fair and polite to a person at the same time. This kind of lapsadaisical kind of approach doesn't wash, because you're not seen as somebody who's giving them the proper advice and somebody that they should listen to. But you can still be polite and fair to a person, but being firm on, like, this is the rules, these are the clauses that are outlined in your tenancy agreement, and you agree to them.
I think rent arrears is probably the biggest one on that. So I had one that we went out to, and again, they'd got themselves into a bit of bother because they get their benefits, for example, directly to themselves. So it was, and obviously they were like, look, I just got myself into a bit of a pickle. And I was like, okay, but we need to think of a way forward so you don't get in this situation again. So we came up with a solution that was going to be getting the universal credit paid directly to us. And then it meant all the tenant was going to have to focus on was an arrears payment rather than having to try and make their rent payments plus that as well. So there's different ways. And again, if we'd gone in on that in a different tone of being like, you've not paid your rent, it would have been very different. But just going and meeting in person
would have been right up.
Yeah. Exactly. But just having that conversation, it means that we've been able to get the situation back on track and get a solution to it, rather than, again, to a point of possibly having to serve a notice to leave. Because ultimately that's not what we want to do. We don't want to have to be putting people out, going through this whole process, and then having to try and turn around a property at the back of it. So when it can be resolved in the first place.
Yeah, definitely.
But if the softer approach, or not so much soft, but the fairer approach doesn't do the trick, then follow up with a firmer approach. So stating that you will look to end the tenancy if the situation isn't rectified, immediately keeping inviting dialogue. So making sure that everything is recorded as well is going to be really key in this situation.
Yeah. And I think, and then like you say, but then that next stage, do you know, if you're still not getting anywhere, and there's still no resolution, do you know, that next stage is ultimately to serve notice of the tenant, and with a physical notice to leave, which is a completely different process depending on whether you are in England or Scotland or Wales. As we say, we've got different approaches to do that. That is obviously the ultimate end point. But I mean, you don't want to get there, and you try your best to assist the tenant and advise them and give them different avenues of assistance to do that. But ultimately, if that's where you end up, that's where you end up, and that's where you need to be if you're in this situation when things do turn really bad.
Yeah, and ultimately, if you can, like we say, if we can get things resolved, and taking that calm approach and nipping things in the bud as well before it does get to a point where the arrears have built up to the point of notice. But ultimately, if the worst does come to the worst and you need to pursue an eviction, you will need a paper trail of resolution attempts. And the fact that it's all been correctly served as well, and the notice stands a good chance in the court. So don't cut corners. I mean, we know we've unfortunately got the odd one that we do have to go through the process, and it is such a lengthy process and such a detailed process as well. There is a lot that goes into having to serve notice on a tenant. So if you can get it to the point that you can resolve it rather than having to go down that route, it's beneficial more for both parties involved there. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, good. So if you are having difficulties, I mean, if you anything that we've run through, do you know whether it's if it's about maintenance, or if it's you're not quite confident in the setup of things, or setting out that agenda at the beginning, or maybe you're just not sure about the correct paperwork and things to have in place, then I mean, you could always reach out to us. You could jump in the comments here. If we're on the rerun, you could jump in the comments. But do you know, there's main things for me that jumped out to there, and communication is always key. And having the knowledge about what is the correct thing to do and the correct approach. And of course, I mean, we might make it all sound quite easy, but obviously we've been doing this for years now. So I mean, and it's not all second nature. Do you know, there's still things that we need to think about, right? What's the right thing to do here? So, but obviously having the right bodies and things to turn to for that right advice, and having that knowledge and continually building on your knowledge through continual learning and things as well is so important as an agent and a landlord if you're self-managed as well.
And what I will say is, obviously, we have a lot of really good tenants as well, and people love to share their horror stories. And not a lot of people are going out there telling you all the good stories about what lovely tenants they've got, how great they've been. a lot of it is the horror stories that like to get shared. So don't let maybe somebody else's negative experience put you off from going through this journey, because if it is done right, it can be both lucrative and obviously give you that extra income. And not only that, but it's giving somebody a home as well, maybe somebody that's not in a position to buy, but they are on the rental side. There's really a lack of rental properties just now, which we're still seeing, especially at your mid-market level as well. So don't let somebody's ghost stories put you off, basically.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Kerin, that's great. Thanks very much for joining me today. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Like I say, there's some comments and things there, but if we're on the rerun, still jump in the comments. We will come back to you all. And until next time, you will catch us on the Saturday morning show. It's goodbye from me and goodbye from Kerin.
Goodbye.
Bye.